And hey, everyone, thank you so much for attending this webinar this evening with Till Ride, which I have a really strong connection with, having worked with Julian on the past capital raise back in September 2019, which is when we kicked things off. And it's been fantastic to really see you grow from there. Um, just as a quick introduction, my name is Robin. I head up the campaign management team here at Birchal, and I work with companies directly like Tiller Rides, which are just fantastic to work with through the equity crowdfunding regime, as it's just such an important business. And it's been fantastic all the way up until this point. And I think before we do get started and do go into the webinar itself, sorry guys, are you getting a little bit of feedback on the line?
We seem to have internet problems, so
you are breaking up fractionally.
I really hope that wasn't me. Unfortunately, when we're in lockdown in Melbourne, the internet is never perfect. So yeah, I really hope that everybody can hear me okay. Fingers crossed that's okay. But before we do, I might just throw over to you guys just to quickly introduce yourselves and just kind of clarify who you are and what Tiller Rides is.
Who's that? Me?
After you.
Look, my name's Julian. You've probably seen me on a few videos and you've seen Jude. I am actually one of the co-founders of Tiller Rides, so I've been on the journey for quite a while. And yeah, I guess that's me. Background in originally I'm from Perth. Obviously, we're based in Perth still. Background in engineering, actually got a teaching degree, and I spent quite a bit of time working on renewable energy, those sort of projects on the engineering side, and then also spent a bit of time working with kids, including over in Victoria for about 3 or 4 years in the early 2000s. And yeah, so worked in that space for a fair while. I had a first startup in 2007. I was actually developing a program for the government, and then some funding got cut, so I actually took it externally and started that. That went really well for quite a while. We ended up shutting it down for a range of reasons, and then I had a couple of years off, and then the idea for a clean urban transport company came around essentially after spending some time studying sustainable cities and where the future of cities are going. So I'll talk about that a bit more. Over to you, Jude.
Great, thanks, Julian. Good evening, everybody. My name's Jude Saladin. So I've joined the Tiller team. I actually joined 12 months ago in a role on the board. And then I've actually been full-time and sort of leading the whole marketing and sales and brand side of the business, the commercialization of this amazing product that we have. And I started full-time from January this year. So it's been a good 6 months. My previous experience is actually majority with one company, the global sporting goods company, Nike. And so I spent 24 years with Nike. I started with Nike in retail, moved into the sales organization, and then developed into what we call the global business marketplace development. I was fortunate enough to actually spend 15 years in Melbourne. I spent 1 year in Sydney, and then I was over in the US for 6 years. My wife and I have 3 young boys. So we actually returned to Australia just prior to COVID having its or making its mark on the world. So I think we arrived 2019 December, the week of Christmas. So just before all that heated up. So we returned here, went back to Perth to put the kids into education in Australia. And so I was fortunate enough to sort of run into these guys, and I really like what they're doing and why they're doing it. It's real innovation to something that I'm passionate about. I do love bicycles, but they've really brought new innovation that hasn't existed to try and solve issues and really get more people on the bikes, which is what we're all about. So I'm pretty happy to have joined the guys and found our feet, and we've got a really exciting few months ahead of us as we finalise the production line and get things actually moving and give us something to sell, which I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for the introduction, guys. For the purpose of going through the webinar and really what the structure is today, I can see that David and Peter, you've already found the Q&A section. What I really encourage everybody to do is use this Q&A section throughout the webinar, because at the end of the webinar, once we've gone through this pitch, and also once we've gone through some pretty common questions that we've seen throughout this whole process, we're going to be throwing it over to you and ask a lot of questions In fact, they're already coming in, which is fantastic. So do not slow down. I will be looking at these, and I will absolutely be asking the guys if they haven't been answered throughout the pitch initially. We will be asking the guys that, to answer these questions and go through them and absolutely have a conversation about it. So please use the Q&A feature as much as possible. Right now, we're going to be running through a pitch deck quickly. So over to you guys.
Great. Thanks, Robin. So what we thought we'd do is just take you through a high-level pitch deck. Hopefully this may answer some of the questions that you have, and then we're definitely keen to spend the majority of time answering your questions and giving you as much detail as you need. So if you just sort of think about it really high level, I just wanted to share with you the vision of Tiller Rides. And, we were founded some 5 years ago, and it really was about being a catalyst for change and inspiring people to use this clean urban transport that was better for the planet, better for their health, and better for their well-being. And that really sums up everything we do, or why we do everything at Tiller Rides. So it really is about how do we make sure that the planet is a better place, but also improving the quality of people's lives along the way. And we really think it's achievable, particularly with the first product, the Roadster, that we're bringing to market. And so, yeah, with this first product, what I'm going to do now is hand you over to Julian, and he's just going to take you through some of the, I suppose, the defining features. When you think about the features of this bike and the Roadster, which is the bike behind us here, so I'll sort of clear up the way a little. When the team really built this, the amazing thing that they did was, which doesn't sound that amazing when you reflect upon it, but they actually went to the marketplace and saw, hey, and they identified what were the obstacles that were stopping people from getting on their bike, and how do we actually get people to use their bike more readily and more often. And really, so when we talk about the features of the bike, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but these are the silos in which the guys were really thinking. And so Julian will now call out what he sort of believes and what we believe are the priority here for the end user and the rider, and what will actually make them want to ride their bike more.
So I guess the thing that really sets the current product, and I'd say this is our philosophy we'll use for future products. So, as investors, you're obviously thinking beyond the first product, but this is where we're at currently. All those features you can see on your screen, the bold ones are actually unique to the Roadster. So there's quite a lot to go through, but I won't go through all of them. Essentially, at the high level, the product has a whole bunch of features that urban riders said they wanted, all into one product. And essentially this frame, the monocoque frame, it's a world first frame. This is actually pressed aluminium. For those that don't know, most bicycle frames that are made from aluminium have to go through a heat treatment process. So they get welded up, then they go through this heat treatment process. And very few people have ever invented a product that's made of sheet metal that can go through that process. So a lot of our work over the initial sort of couple of years was, how do we shape this frame so it gives us the style we want, will survive that heat treating process, and then actually allow all the features to be integrated. So we use a very sophisticated bit of, we call it 3D CAD software, computer-aided design, and that allows us to design every little bit into this to be integrated seamlessly. So some of the key things that people told us they wanted was, if I'm going to go out with an e-bike, and normally e-bikes are sort of $3,000 to $6,000, they want to make sure it's going to be there when it gets back. Now, most bikes, if you look at most e-bikes, they still have, they still require you to carry a D-lock and keys or something like that around with you. What we did is we looked at all the ways that people steal bikes. And you can put a heavier lock on a bike, but actually it's the GPS tracking that really is a massive deterrent to stealing the product. And it's a bit like the Find My iPhone type features as well. So inside our bike, we have a motion sensing alarm. When you park the bike, you actually turn that on. It turns on a light on the dash, so it's warning people. If someone was to touch it, it gives them verbal warnings, so they know that they're actually playing with a bike that's got this sophisticated technology in it. If they kept playing with it or tried to steal it, then the alarm will actually go off. And I'll just also mention, as part of that, when they park it, they will actually pull out this thing, which maybe you can see, maybe you can't. We call the quick tether. It plugs into the side of the frame, and that actually allows you to physically tether the bike to a pole. And that's in terms of not having to carry a D-lock around, that's that feature. Then you arm the bike, and together you've got this sort of physical and digital locking system. Now, if someone stole it, the GPS will fire up and then it'll send through the mobile network, because there's a SIM card inside the bike. It'll actually send it through to the app and you can actually find your bike. So that bit of technology combined with the physical lock is world leading in terms of how people are doing stuff. And you may have seen a lot of interviews. I did another 2 today, funny enough, talking about people have coined this like the Tesla of e-bikes. And it's that digital connectivity, which is really world leading and very Tesla-like, because it also allows us to update the product over time. So if we find a bug or we find something that we want to improve, we can actually download software into the bike and improve that next year, the year after, and so on. So that's critical features. Another thing people told us is they wanted a long-range battery. There's all this range anxiety you may have seen about riding. You know, in Perth here, for example, people want to ride at least sort of 15 kilometres to and from work. And if you don't have a bike that you can rely on, then people won't ride. So this bike should do 95 kilometres on a full charge on full power. A lot of people will ride around only on full power. So we talk about our rating at that full power. You'll see other e-bikes say it'll do up to 200 kilometres. Ours will probably do more than that if you use the lower settings. But we always try to be as conservative as possible and say it's on full power, it's 95 kilometres an hour. So massive battery, comes out of the other side, a quick rotation and you pull it out. And the locking system for the battery isn't another key. It's actually linked again back to our digital, our software, and that actually locks, when you arm the bike, it also locks the battery. So that's another bit of the anti-theft side of things. Then people said, well, hang on a minute, I want to go out for dinner, I want to go out at night, or I want to be able to come home late from work. So we integrated lights front and rear. It totally amazed me back in 2015 or 16 when we started looking at this. Why don't bikes have these features integrated in the beginning? Lights is one of the most obvious ones, but you will rarely find a bike with them actually integrated in. So the way we've built the frame has allowed us to actually integrate it fully, rather than have a bolt-on thing on the front with some external cables hanging out. And a little feature is that the rear light is actually behind the rear carrier. Now that's essential because you're going to put your kids on here or your panniers on here, and there's some bikes that have actually got their lights, some of our competitors, shall we say, have got them on the seat post. As soon as you put anything on the back, you can't see them. Now it seems like a small thing, but very annoying when you actually want to feel safe getting home at night, because safety is one of the main motivators. So that's really some of the key features, some small things that make a big difference to people: a belt drive, no grease on your pants, no grease on your skirt, and very, very low maintenance. So most of the people that want to buy this kind of product, they don't want to spend the weekends fixing or degreasing their chain or greasing their chain. So we put a belt drive on. And that's combined with what we call an internal gearbox. So there is no grease on the bike externally anywhere. We've integrated a double stand. You can't see this probably, but up under the breast of the bike is a double stand that I can't actually, there you go, you can see it. So into the breast of the bike, there's a stand, and that allows you to, like today, I had to park it on the train, so you can park it, leave it, sit and do some work on the train, and then the bike will actually, there you go, Jude. So then the bike will actually just stand there and you don't need to worry about it. Now, for a lot of people, that's really great for going shopping. If you have a single stand, it'll normally fall over. And the other one of the things, you've got kids, many people that it won't fall over when they're loading their kids on as well. So and it just disappears. So instead of having a big heavy thing hanging out the bottom of the bike, it's integrated into it. So that's kind of like, I guess that's the key core features. We could go into all the other detail. On the screen, you can see the app, the connectivity side of it. So there's a whole bunch of stuff. You'll notice that there isn't any display on the handlebars. There's a couple of reasons for that. And again, this is this thinking and the Tesla-like thinking. If you notice, the Tesla's only got one screen on the dash. Why should we have a permanent LCD screen on a bike like this that's going to go out of date when we can do it with the app? So you put a quad lock or a similar style phone holder on the dash, on the handlebars, and it talks via Bluetooth real time down to our electronics. And then if you want to see the speed, you can see on that screen, the fourth to the right, you can see all the things you'd need to see, but we can then keep updating that based on what customers say they want. and it doesn't need to be permanently on here. The interesting thing with e-bikes is they peak at 25 kilometers an hour. They're 250 watts maximum. This is like the Australian standard now. So what you find is that you don't really need to see your speed, because once you'll feel the bike, the assist will pull you up to 25 k's an hour, then you feel it cut out, and you know your speed. So we've never felt the need. We had bikes initially with screens on them, and no one ever looked at them. So that's sort of how it's all evolved. And I guess that there's some features you can get of this on other products. All on one product. There's nothing in the world that's doing this. Well, one last feature everyone asked about, but it's actually a USB-C outlet. So if you've got your phone on here, you can actually be charging it while you're riding to work. If you want to use your Google Maps or similar style system, you've got this massive battery inside where you may as well use a bit of it to charge your phone. So I did also probably not mention, but the rear rack here, super solid. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this, but the films you've probably seen from the video were actually filmed with someone sitting on the back here with a camera. So we've conservatively loaded these as a maximum of 60, but obviously it takes a bit more. But we wanted to make sure that people, when they put their children on here, felt really safe, that this thing was solid. So when you ever get to touch one of these, you'll feel that it's quite amazing. And part of the innovation, which you can't really see here, but this part of the mudguard is actually structural. It's not a thin piece of mudguard. So this, combined with these vertical bits, are actually the structure. So instead of having like a mudguard and bits to create the structure, we've put them all together. And that was to minimize the aesthetics of this, but also have quite a strong rear rack. So that's kind of like I guess that's the summary of the Roadster. And feel free to ask any questions if I've missed anything.
Thanks, Julian. And so what I wanted to just quickly show you now is just who our target riders are, or target consumers in the marketplace, particularly within Australia. So we're really focusing on the metro techs and the leading lifestyles. And this is really for our primary market, because these are the two, I suppose, profiles within the market that, one, they really need a high level of mobility. They're inner city livers, they have a high disposable income. And so something like this will fit into their lifestyle and actually enhance their lifestyle, and they'll be able to move through the cities a lot more, with more ease than they currently do. So they're the two consumer profiles that we'll be targeting in Australia as our primary audience. They'll also be the ones who could probably most readily afford a $4,500 bike. So Julian will talk to this, but we will get to a point where we can actually offer a subscription model. And that will, again, open up our target market, because it will be very similar to how the majority of people purchase their phones these days. They buy them on a 24-month or 36-month plan. We'll have the ability to actually expand our market when we move into that type of a purchasing mode too. When we think about our growth, and you may have seen some of this information that we've already provided, there's a lot more of this in the offer document that is coming out in the early next week. And so we know that there's growth in Australia, some 50,000 bikes last year. I think BIA, Bike Industries Australia, are forecasting over 65,000 in this current 12 months, a huge increase on year. The European, as you can imagine, the European market, which readily adopts things a lot faster than we generally do in Australia, they're well and truly involved in e-bikes, and e-bikes are leading the growth within their bike industries as well. So our goal is to enter the Australian market, particularly in the first 6 months, and put ourselves in a position in year 2 to be entering the European market for the summer in 2023. The US is also a market that we will definitely be looking at. And if you just think about how we're bringing the Roadster to market, we'll start with the Founders Edition that lands this December. And then come April and May, we'll be bringing in the Roadster 2.0, which has a couple of extra features that the Founders Edition doesn't have. And these bikes will be priced at $4,900. And we're bringing in two models called the Dawn and the Dusk, inspired by the beautiful greys that you see at those times of the day. And we'll also be taking some pre-orders prior to these both launching. And you'll see the bike behind me is actually the Founders Edition, but we've had that painted up in the Dawn colorway just to give people an idea in regards to what a lighter version of the bike will look like. But at this point, we'll be launching the bike with the Founders Edition, that black colorway. I'm sure we'll get it to it at some point, but we already have 200 pre-orders on those first 500 bikes that land. And then if you sort of see this, this structure of our go-to-market plan, really high level, we're doing the raise now. We're going to be building the brand identity in the marketplace in the coming months. And then in November, for a 6-week period, we're going to be running another pre-sales campaign to ensure that we enter the new year, or when the bikes land, we've driven as many sales as possible to ensure that we can get some early revenue, get the working capital needed to ensure we can bring in the other, the dawn and the dusk at those timings of April and May. And so that's sort of our high level go-to-market strategy. You know, there's some pretty critical elements there for us. There is obviously this raise, which sort of just starts everything, but it really is that pre-sales campaign. So we enter December, January. We would like to have another 100 pre-sales made, so that would take us up to about 300 pre-sales of the first 500 in that, and we're targeting 500 sales in the first quarter of 2022, and then also 500 in quarter 2.
As Jude talked about, we are launching to market with, this is kind of some of the different ways we will generate revenue over time. In the bottom left-hand corner there is the first type of sales we'll make, which we can call, you know, business to consumer, retail sales. That'll be a big part of the business initially. But the wonderful thing about our product is that we've learned that because of this digital connectivity that we have in it, it allows us to go into these other areas. The first one will be fleets for organisations. We've had a lot of interest from people that have like a block of flats or units that they're developing, and they want to be able to provide, say, 5 bikes for people to use. The wonderful thing with the Roadster that all the other bikes they've looked at doesn't do is two key things. One is all the features are built in. The people just need a helmet, and the code actually need the app if you don't want to use that, and they can walk out the door and go for a ride and come back. I had a guy on the train today actually offer me to come down and pitch his backpackers. It was a bit of a high-end backpackers for people to come here, and they said they were looking for e-bikes to do exactly that. So having it all integrated is amazing. And then the second thing is the connectivity allows them to press a button and actually find if there's someone didn't return or the bike didn't come, they can actually press a button and see where their fleet is. So that whole tracking of their assets is a big part of what we can do in the product that other products can't do. Now, we know that market's there. You know, we've got people on the East Coast looked at, say, even up to sort of 60 for a development, because the development was just out of Byron Bay and all the people wanted to get into Byron Bay but not take a car. So there's quite a lot of opportunity just in that space. And then, as Jude was saying before, we can then start moving into an area where we offer mobility as a service. So instead of selling the product and then providing servicing such as fleet management, we can actually start providing the entire product on a payment per month. So that's the ultimate goal, but we need to get a few things in place, such as service contracts with mobile servicing agents, that kind of thing in place before we can offer mobility as a service, which is why it's a bit further down the track than the individual sales. And then lastly, as we get more and more bikes out there, you can actually start to get a sense of where the bikes are being used, even to the degree of, you know, how many hills people are going over, those kind of things. And people like the local councils do want to know where to put in new bike parking, where are most people going. And that kind of data is actually valuable for a bunch of industries. And the great thing is the kind of value we can generate out of that actually adds to realizing our vision of getting more people on the road. So it's a wonderful way of actually generating revenue and actually speeding up that process. Because as we go forward, when you saw before the catalyst for change, and you can see that vision up the top there, that catalyst is actually starting to work at other levels, not just products, but all products and services, but actually working potentially at the government level. Okay, how are we going to get more people riding? You may have seen what's happened in countries like Copenhagen, transformation in 15 years from almost no riding to 40, 50, 60% of people riding every day to work. You know, these are the kind of transformations that are possible, especially in the inner city parts of Australia. and we want to be part of that transformation. So that's kind of a summary of our revenue streams.
And so for those of you who may have heard of us before or been part of our previous raise, you would have seen that our branding had a little different feel to it. And so we've just been really cognizant of the fact that, hey, we know who our target market is, and we just felt our branding was probably a little maybe retro, or you know, it looked and it felt probably a little bit too much like Fremantle. And we know that this brand we want this brand to appeal to a broader audience. And so we've done some a brand refresh and cleaning up the brand, and we're actually in the process of finalizing our brand identity kit, working with a really talented group in Subiaco, a local group. And so we will have our brand portfolio ready to go in about 6 weeks' time as we relaunch our e-commerce model and be ready for this pre-sales event in November that I discussed earlier.
And look, this is just to give you a sense of what's been happening over the last period. You know, we have been working on this project for around 4.5, 5 years. I'd have to say an interesting thing, and you could see this in this timeline. As a startup, you actually do end up spending quite a bit of time raising money. So it hasn't been all R&D and development, but essentially the start of the business was really around that research in terms of what do these writers want, designing a product around it. There was a whole bunch of testing that we did to make sure the product was right. So you can see in 2019, we built those 6 beta testing bikes. And then we actually went out and put them on the road with 6 people that had pre-ordered them to make sure that the design was right. The only feedback that we got that we needed to change, interestingly, because of the approach we'd taken, was, can you make the quick tether a bit longer? Because there's sometimes trees that we want to wrap around and it's not long enough. So we have extended it in the production models. Then we started to look forward and go, okay, now we need to get into production. So we spent a lot of time really strategically. One of the guys on our board has a lot of experience with offshore manufacturing. So he was to guide us, and we found our world-class manufacturer. And then you actually had to take the designs, which were really prototype level, and start turning them into production levels. So we've been doing that for the last year and a half, since that 2019 equity crowdfunding that essentially funded that and quite a bit of the tooling. We finished the tooling roughly 3 months ago with this manufacturer. And then essentially now we're at the point where all that work's been done, and essentially the business, which was almost entirely research and development, design and engineering and manufacturing, the team now, Jude's team, has actually joined in the last 6 months to start looking forward to actually how do we take this to market and sell them in the volumes that we need to make the business as profitable and grow as we'd like it to. So as you can see, the looking forward is very much this Perth launch. We do believe Melbourne's the next best city in terms of cycling. I've lived there. We've done a lot of research into the interest in our product. So that's probably where we'll start first. But the reality is the more we raise in this round, the quicker we'll be getting to the East Coast. So if you know any more friends that want to invest, that's what you should be telling them.
Thanks, Julian. If I could maybe just add, just in regards to the team, when you see some of our information on Birchal, it sort of seems that there's a big board, which most startups don't have, and there's a lot of individuals. The reality is the board have actually have been on for
4 years, yeah.
3.5 to 4 years now, unpaid. There is a small options plan for them that you'll actually see in the offer document. And then the actual team, there are quite a number of part-timers, and we're sort of ramping the team up. So the team of full-timers is actually 9 individuals, and that's actually doubled in size. So there's been 4 of us come on board in the last 6 months. So yeah, there are a lot of images on that screen, but we have been running very lean. And as we ramp up towards this, executing our bikes into the market for the first time.
We get that question quite a bit, so thanks, Jude.
And here we just have some information in regards to what we're doing with this particular round. We did open, this is the second tranche of round 3. Round 3, we had the capacity to do 3.3 million, and we raised 1.1 over the November-December period, which wasn't the easiest time to actually raise funds. But with the success that we had from the previous crowdsource funding, we thought that it was the right thing to do this time to raise close to $2 million if we can. And that will really set us up on the way to kickstart this production. And so the shares are at $1.50. We have a minimum raise of 500K. There will be a little bit of information on the offer document just in regards to what that actually activates and how many bikes that lands, that minimum. But just from the interest we've seen so far, we're really confident that we'll hit above the $1 million mark and really be on the way and being able to execute on the plans that we currently have.
Is that it? I think is that the last one?
That's it from a slide point of view.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys. Fantastic.
We might have a quick bit of.
Sure, there's a few questions to answer.
Absolutely. Go ahead. We've had some fantastic questions come through. And I think, guys, just so we can make this as conversational as possible, I'd love you to stop sharing your screen on this one. I think, bar me going into the questions which I've put together, I'd love to run through some of the questions which you've had already from the audience here. And one of the first questions, which I've seen quite a theme of, is somebody here has asked, saying, the pricing seems to be at the higher end in terms of the e-bike market, and what features really differentiate the product against this? You've talked a lot about this, but I think from a comparative perspective, anybody who's looking at an e-bike, the same way they're looking at a car, they're going to be looking at specifications. I love, and I think from my personal perspective, on the last time when you were doing the rounds, the app was not, it wasn't a feature at that point in time, really. And the way in which you've built up the product, it's very different. And even when you talk about doing a fleet for companies and they can manage their bikes essentially and where they are, I think it's really interesting. But you are the master of the features, so I'll absolutely throw over to you to really highlight some of the features of the product against competitors.
Yeah, let me talk about the price, because it's really interesting in this game, because we get the two ends of the spectrum. Some people sort of approach us and say, hey, that's a lot of money for a bike at $4,500. And then we get other people saying, hey, you're actually giving a lot in an e-bike for $4,500. And I think the difference in those two opinions that we've had shared with us is the fact that if you actually get out there and do some research and you know the e-bike marketplace and what's involved, then you will sort of see that it's actually quite an affordable proposition for what we're pulling together. If you're not necessarily used to spending that level of money on bikes, nor understand what the competitor set is out there, it generally can be a little bit of sticker shock when people see it for the first time. But when I first came across this bike, I'm quite familiar with probably more road bikes than e-bikes in my history. But even with e-bikes, I went out there and did a little bit of marketplace analysis before I joined the board. And I sort of came back and asked them why it was so cheap, because of what was out there. So when we actually look out in the marketplace, whether it be a Gazelle or whether it be even a Van Moof, and what other people are offering, the safety, the distance, so the range anxiety, the security, all those coupled together, no one actually offers such a comprehensive package here. And even outside of the app and the asset identification and protection, just what we're offering and the quality of this build is exceptional compared to anything on the market. So we would love to take the Pepsi challenge with any bike on the market. We really feel as if this is really good value.
Yeah, Jude wasn't here for this part, but we ran 1,200 to 1,500 test rides in 2019.
Yeah,
and that was a great, as I said, because I was responsible for the product in the beginning, but to actually then go and speak to real people about the product, and some of those, one of the common journeys is people would arrive, they'd think, wow, okay, I didn't know e-bikes were this expensive. And then they'd go off and we'd tell them about the different shops to go and have a look at. There's probably about 4 or 5 different shops here in Perth. We'd say, go and see them all. Like without fail, almost, there's probably one that didn't, but they go out and see them and come back and pre-order our product, because they just couldn't. I mean, the quality is one thing. This thing rides amazingly. Even just little things like if you find a bike and it's got a loose mudguard, it just destroys the quality of the ride continuously. So we've done a lot of things on that to make those little finer details and rattles and everything disappear. If you don't have a double stand, then you can't do X, Y, and Z on it. If you don't have lights, then you can't do these things on it. The massive thing, and this has probably happened more than anything else, is that I run into people and they say, and this actually happened literally a week ago. I was out at a cafe, I parked the bike. This woman was sitting in the cafe having, just out the front actually, down here in Freo. There's quite a few cafes in Freo here. But she came up to me, she said, how are you even leaving your bike in a street, such a beautiful thing like that? Because I'm worried about it being stolen, because there actually is quite a few bikes stolen here in Freo. We have a Facebook page called Freo Stolen Bikes, funny enough.
There's one in Melbourne as well. Yeah.
So you can see what's going on. So she's looking at me and I said, well, come and have a look at this. And I showed her the anti-theft system, and she was blown away. She got her phone out, went straight to the website, and I don't know if she pre-ordered one straight away, but she's like, I'm going to tell my friends about this. So it's a thing that you can't get these features anywhere else. So that's one thing. The quality bikes kind of start at the $3,500 range, and you'll find a lot of people, and Jude's sort of talked about this in other areas, is that often people just go cheap on something until they know what actually is required. So there's a bunch of
value it adds to their,
and how much, because until you've ridden an e-bike, you don't know you've got these problems, but people have had the problems. So our local e-bike shop, which we actually get tires spoked, wheels spoked and a whole bunch of stuff, they support us in our prototyping. Their average sale is going up. So I went down there the other day and they've got bikes now that are 4.5, 5.5, and they're selling them really fast. So we actually would say, and we've had a lot of people say that this, as Jude said, your bike is actually too cheap for what you get for it. And there isn't no apples for apples comparison really anyway, but you think about what you actually need, and once you've ridden one, you realize that it's actually good value.
And we understand the marketplace as it develops will be very diverse as well. Not everybody will go for a Toyota Corolla, for example. They'll actually want a little bit more performance or a little bit more security or whatever it may be.
Yeah. So we're not going for the cheapest, but we should also say that over time with volume, we will either work out to get it cheaper if we think that's what's needed, or we'll add some of the features that are on our backlog if that's what customers. And part of our model of actually having, instead of selling through other people's shops, selling directly to the people that are riding the product, we can get that direct feedback about what people want, what problems they're having. And actually, as we improve models over time, we're actually developing them based on the feedback. So that's one of the reasons we're doing that. That sort of
awesome.
And if they're comfortable with the $4,500, we start paying dividends to our investors.
Yeah, that's right.
Thanks, guys. And Paul, that answers your question as well on pricing, which is perfect. And a bit further down, there's a really funny question here, which I guess really alludes to whether or not the Telluride's bike is hackable, so you can make it faster. But it's asking about regulation and whether or not the Telluride's is easily modified, because there's a concern around government bans and regulations on easily modifiable bikes. Is that something which you've thought of and built a feature into place?
I can talk to that one. Look, there's a lot of stuff going on at the moment. We posted a bit on it in the last couple of weeks on our social media, because there's been some, if you watch the scooter game, there's been a whole heap of accidents on those. People have died, brain injury, all that sort of thing. So that's been tightly regulated now. On the e-bike game, Australia's a little bit of a cowboy area still, cowgirl potentially. But what's happening is, and I'll give you a little example, is that in New York City, e-bikes took off. They just had big motors, and a lot of the delivery vehicles became e-bikes with throttles on them. People were doing huge amount of accidents. They banned the whole thing and banned 6 months. What they then did is brought it in, and they sort of followed what was the European, and then which is you have to activate the motor with your pedals. You can't do it with a throttle on the handlebars. And then also, you have to limit the power to 250 watts and a speed to a certain speed. The US is 120 miles an hour. Here is 25 kilometers an hour. Now, look, I would probably argue that if you had some bike freeways where it was just bikes, then go for it. Let's ramp it up a bit, maybe to 30, 32. But the reality is in Australia is that bikes and pedestrians and push bikes are all mixing on the same paths.
Yeah.
The other thing is when you ride at 25 k's an hour through a busy street, I've ridden through the middle of Melbourne many times, raising money actually, funny enough, and 25 k's an hour is faster than the traffic in the CBD. So riding amongst cars at 25 is fairly safe. If a door opens, that kind of thing, obviously we've got good disc brakes on ours, but you can stop in time. So because we're all about the industry and growing the industry and getting more people riding, it needs to be safe. So our view is we don't really want to let like any speed, people just let them go at any speed. And actually, as part of the European standard, which we've designed the Roadster to, you have to make it unhackable. And look, I'm sure somewhere in the world, someone is going to find out how to hack it, but the coding in there is encrypted, so they'll have to work pretty hard at it. But for a few people that do that, go for it. I don't think this is the style of bike that the people are going to whiz around at 45, 50 kilometers an hour. But also, I'll just say in Europe, there's a thing called a speed pedelec, which can go at 45, I think something kilometers an hour. I think 0.1 or 0.2% of the market is actually going to that. You do need to have a helmet, and you do need to, like a more serious helmet, and you do need to register the product, which maybe deters people. But they tried that there, and not many people are going for it. So Europe is basically entirely 25 k's an hour, 250 watts pedelecs.
Yeah, right.
And that's what we're doing.
Yeah, awesome. And you've actually had a few questions on this as to how much the Roadster weighs. I know you picked it up earlier and it didn't look too challenging. So
what I'd say is it's 25 kilos.
Yeah.
So that's the number. And people go, oh, well, I've seen a bike for 20, 22, 23 or whatever. I say to them, well, have you seen a bike with a carrier, with a 95 kilometer battery, with all the things on it, stand and what have you. So that's 25 kilos with everything built in. So it's a slightly different proposition, but
surprisingly enough, the frame is a lot lighter than you think.
Yeah, the frame's 3.5.
The frame actually looks quite heavy, but the frame is actually quite light. But then when you put the soft ride tires, the good rims, the gear, the hubs, the gears in the hubs at the back there, and the motor, it sort of does add up. Yeah. Now
the thing that's important is when the first bike I rode, just as a little bit on weight in the design phase, is that it's where the weight is. So my dad's from racing and Formula One racing. You'll see all the weight is down low. You'll notice the Tesla, 2.2 tons of car, high performance vehicle, but all the weight, they've now moved right to the bottom, which you'll see the batteries are basically in the bit between the two wheels. So the first bike I rode, actually, all the e-bikes I saw with the batteries on top of the rear carrier, or even in the down tube, it's not bad, but there's still quite a high center of gravity. Whereas you'll notice on the Roadster, it's way down low, and the lower the center of gravity, the bike actually handles really well. Now, we'll be honest that there's some people that don't have full mobility or don't have the strength to lift the product. That is certainly an issue, and it's not the product for you. So we would recommend going for a lower range bike, maybe even a smaller frame or something lighter. You will lose features, but obviously you've got to balance those things out.
Of course. And there's a couple of other questions, all from the same individual. We've still got quite a few more questions to get through, and we'll do the absolute best we can to answer them in as detailed fashion as possible. What's that?
It'll be quicker.
TikTok. So no, absolutely. I think the level of detail that you're answering here is fantastic. But there's a lot to get through. So how somebody's asked here about return on investment and what time frame you really realistically would love to provide a return for investors. Of course, there's a lot of information which is going to be in the offer document around this. I have to say to everybody, please do go ahead and read the offer document and understand the risks of getting into this. But it is essentially a private company. And of course, you're raising funds to be able to go on and grow the business. I know that in theory, you'd love to be able to lay out a timeline. So maybe you guys would want to just talk a little bit about that and what your proposed potential exit opportunities might be.
Yeah, great question. And we get this a lot. First and foremost, we're not a startup to get this thing up and running and try an IPO for the sake of getting an IPO over the line. And I think that needs to be known before anybody invests. We want to grow. We're going to do it profitably. We're going to do the right thing. We're going to reward shareholders as appropriate. We also can see that within 2-year horizon from here, when we map out where we'll be, so midway through 2023, we believe either an IPO or a trade sale may be the right way to actually raise more funds to deliver the growth that we would like to get. And so the growth in Europe and also the US and potentially some Asian markets. So depending on the needs of the business. But as you said, as a private company, we'd probably rather keep it private for not forever by any means, but for a period of time, and reward shareholders through dividends along the way, before we either IPO or potential trade sale. There has sort of already been some interest in what we're doing from some of the larger, one in particular, one of the larger privately held companies based out of Holland that actually owns 5 bike brands. That could be something, but we are definitely here to impact millions of people's lives through urban mobility and doing it profitably. And I think that's probably the most we could answer that.
Yeah, and
yeah, absolutely.
We can't forecast valuations of the business or what kind of, what that would be, but when you compare the valuation now, which we're looking sort of post this raise, somewhere between 8 and 10 million, once you start selling 10,000 bikes and you're generating $45 million in revenue, you've got a very valuable business. So in terms of how the share price should grow if we achieve those goals, and obviously investors need to work out whether you think we will, there's a big market out there. You've got these $7 billion worth of these bikes being sold already. The growth rate when I started this was somewhere around 4%. It's now at 12%. We all know the 2020s are going to be the clean transport revolution, whether it's in electric vehicles, electric trucks, electric transport. It's all happening. You can see it. If you turn on my LinkedIn feed at the moment, there's stuff happening right across Australia and globally on that front. We're planning to play, a significant role in that. So
part of that evolution, I think we all can acknowledge that just replacing the standard cars and vehicles that are on the road now with electric vehicles is not necessarily the answer. It definitely won't change the congestion issues.
Totally agree.
Support the health and well-being of a greater number of people.
And just so last point, because that is a good one, is that I remember thinking, and this is probably everyone can do a little reflection on themselves. If you actually want to move to an electric vehicle now, in my mind, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I was thinking, electric car, and back then they were probably 100, 120,000. If you want to shift to an electric vehicle now, a good one, what, 60, 50, 60, $70,000. Right now you can move to 100% clean transport for $4,500. And when you actually look at it that way, because I basically, my car, I have a ute, which I use for work, for Tiller rides, and it's done 2,000 kilometres in the last year instead of 13,000, because all my trips are essentially on the Roadster now. So we've had prototypes to ride around since 2018. So I've been riding basically Roadster since then. So
probably fair to say that the Roadster's worth more than the ute.
That's right.
Yeah.
I didn't bring that up again.
Yeah. No,
so there's a whole lot of value propositions, obviously, with a product like this. There's a lot of people actually getting rid of their second car and replacing it with electric bikes. And again, that's a big part of where these pre-sales have come from.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the last question in that set of quite large questions is the proposed funding to be made in the form of convertible notes? The answer is no. The shares are essentially direct shares in the company. They're ordinary shares and they hold voting rights in the company. All the details on this will be in the offer document when the offer is open, which is obviously pretty exciting. It's going to be next week, looking to be on Tuesday. So that's the 24th of August. And for everybody who has expressed interest to invest, you will be given first access and you will be notified as soon as the offer does launch. Julianne here has asked a great question. Obviously asked how much the bike weighs. We've already answered that one. Asked, will customers need to pay a monthly fee to essentially use the GPS feature? And has asked, could you show the way in which the alarm speaks, or maybe not show it right now? Maybe you have a video that you could share later. I think it'd be a really cool thing to do.
You answer that.
Okay, so with the data, that is something that we're talking to some couple of multiple providers at the moment to ensure we can get the right.
Sorry, I just had to turn it on.
So from a data point of view, we are looking at an option where there is a period, whether it be 12 or 18 months, where a rider doesn't necessarily need to pay for their GPS connectivity. From the numbers that we're looking at now, we're thinking potentially there may be a charge between $3 and $5 per month if the rider wanted to continue with that GPS connectivity. But that's definitely something that we are we're working through the math, I suppose, and the provider because of that. We've definitely gone with the provider that will give the most coverage, but also do it in the most economical way. So we're actually using MQTT, for those of you who are familiar with this. And so, yeah, there will be a charge. We're working out the details of that, but it would be minimal.
Yeah, awesome.
Great question.
I'm not sure how much you can hear from there, but essentially, now I should also say we are the team that are basically adjusting or refining the software in the bike. They may choose to change some of this, so don't expect this is exactly how it will work. But currently, when you arm the bike, you've got 4 buttons on the handlebar. You can hold down the arming button.
My alarm is on. See you soon.
So I just held down the arming button. That's now made the alarm go on. And then I can disarm it using a code on the handlebars. So when the alarm's on, you can actually see a light flashing on the dash. Can you show them that, Jude? Up high from there. So you can see an alarm light flashing. That's to warn people that might want to come and steal it. And then if I press the code in, and it's disarmed the bike. I think I just did something by touching the battery. I'm not sure what happened then. This model, I should actually say, the battery that we've got out of this is actually out of our beta bike. So I think actually something I did wrong. Anyway.
Just pulled the battery back in because you had pulled it out before, right?
Yeah, I pulled that out. Anyway, let's keep going. So I think that's what happened.
Hi, ready to go when you are.
Anyway, it boots up. But the
Got it.
The key point is that the thing will talk to you when, instead of beeping and you wondering what's going on, it'll actually talk to you and let you know what's going on. And we thought that makes the product a lot more friendly than sort of, a lot of products just have flashing lights or beeps on them. So that's essentially what it does in terms of using the...
Yeah, great.
My alarm is on. See you soon.
So, and it also will talk to the potential thief as well. So...
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And Barbara here has asked, is there a cradle for your phone? I'm sure that you've probably had this asked before.
Is there what, sorry?
A cradle, essentially. So something like a platform on the handlebars where you could attach your phone.
We don't do our own version. There's so many good ones out there.
Yeah.
We will, part of the product journey when you go and order a Roadster will be actually the ability to buy a couple of we do a lot of work into the research and what's good. So we'll probably put a couple or 2 or 3 on the site. So you can order those. But the quad lock is very good. A lot of people talk about that.
Usually it's such an incredible product.
But we found a cheap one as well that does a reasonably good job. Not as good as quad lock, but you don't actually have to have a thing attached to your phone permanently. So we might offer those 2 originally.
Yeah.
And that's the whole idea, is that you don't have to do a whole bunch of research into lots of different products to add to your bike. That's really the only one, and potentially a baby carrier as well for the back.
Yeah, awesome. And Ray here has asked how you actually charge the battery on the bike. I'm sure it's pretty simple. Yeah.
Well, it's the equivalent is really the laptop charger. So you've actually plug it into the wall. You've got a little, I guess you call it a transformer, and then a cable runs into the bike. The great thing with the Roadster is you can actually plug it in straight into the battery on the bike, or you can take the battery off and plug it off in your office or in your house. We found a lot of people, again, Roadster riders said, we don't always have electricity where we park our bike. So they go and park it outside, take the battery inside, and charge it.
Yeah, right. That's awesome. That's awesome. Loads of feature questions coming in from the bike, and I think I can probably answer this one. So Jason's asked if the motor is front wheel drive or rear wheel drive or both. From the last time I recall, it's front wheel drive.
That's right. Yep.
Fantastic. And Jason, I love this next question. How does the bike cope in poor and wet weather? I'm from Melbourne. I've cycled around Melbourne a lot in torrential rain sometimes, and any bike is not at home. So I can imagine that just with any biking situation, it's well, a similar scenario. But I'm sure that the wet weather is not too bad for the electric motor.
Well, the good thing about the electric motor, and we could go into more range around that, there is 3 options for electric motors. You can put the front wheel, the mid-drive, or the rear drive. We've chosen the front for a range of reasons, but that motor has come from a company which is the leading Chinese brand, and they have been around and surviving all through China, which has got a diverse amount of even humidity, rain, snow, all those kind of things. It's been around that company for sort of 20-something years, and we've never had a failure yet on any motors on test products. The other thing is, which is phenomenal, is that monocoque frame, that is kind of like the first rain jacket for all the electronics. All the electronic wiring inside there is from a company called Hygo. Hygo has waterproof connectors, and then all the electronics that's in the bike is actually pretty much waterproof as well. We do our testing in buckets of water, to actually make sure they're sealed. So you've got these multiple levels to protect, especially the delicate things like the electronics. The battery, another big important part, we actually collaborated with we don't know if they're the top they're in the top 3 battery manufacturers in China. They make batteries for companies like Honda and that kind of thing. We actually collaborated on the design so that also was very well sealed as well. So we've not had water problems on our prototypes, and the production model is, I'd say, 3 or 4 times better in terms of its sealing than the prototypes were. So,
and that's coupled with the mud guards, and just from a rider experience, the mud guards and also the tyres that we've used are really generous tyres, so there is no issue in the wet.
Yeah, fantastic. And we've had a couple of questions on this actually, and I'm glad you touched on the components. We've had a couple of questions on where the bike components essentially come from and where they're manufactured. And yeah, I mean, I guess you can answer this and breaking down the company structure.
Yeah. So manufacturing wise, when we went out to find someone, as I mentioned before, one of our board members was one of the advisors, but we actually also partnered with a company that essentially sets up what they call a manufacturing architecture, and they have a specialty to do it in China. The thing with the bike game is almost all the bike parts that people buy these days come from Taiwan or China, okay, and actually more come from China than what they used to. And then there's a thing where when we talk to our contract manufacturer who actually assembles the whole product. Now, as I said, a lot of our products are made by us, so a lot of injection molds and all that kind of stuff. So we handle that ourselves. But the off-the-shelf products, they wanted them to be within half an hour to 2 hours of the assembly plant. So if there's any problem, if a spoke's the wrong size or they sent the wrong ones out there, they can get something very quickly, maybe within 2 hours, but certainly within a day. So in terms of increasing the efficiency and the cost effectiveness of your manufacturing, that's really what you want to do. Now, we would have loved to manufacture in Australia. I set off to try and make prototypes here in Australia. And basically starting with that frame, we couldn't work out how to do that in Australia with the tons presses that you need to press the shape, to then heat treat it, to do the machining, all those kind of things. There was bits that were here, but the whole package wasn't here. So essentially we've based, I think every part of our bike is either made or sourced from China. I'd say that's pretty much the case. So that's our manufacturing plant is just over the river or over the ocean from Hong Kong near Shenzhen. Most of the parts come from within half an hour, 2 hours of there.
And I'll quickly just add, we see ourselves as an urban mobility company, not an e-bike company. So this is just our first bike. Without question, our next product, we will look first to produce in Australia if we can and manufacture here. Yeah. And with the increase in robotics and their welding capacity and how that works, we would love to be setting something up, even here in Perth or just in WA, to be building potentially our next product here.
Yeah, essentially, without automation, it would be very difficult to be cost competitive. So that's what we're looking at.
Yeah, fantastic, fantastic. And as we basically just ticked over to 8:30 or 6:30 from where you guys are, we do record these sessions, and for everybody who has attended, we will be sending around a recording. So if you do need to duck off at any point in time, or do need to duck off right now, we've got a few more questions. If you guys are happy, I'm really would love to go through these. And for anybody who's also there who hasn't felt like they've had a question answered yet, that they'd love to ask, please pop it in the Q&A and we'll answer it right now. In fact, the questions are so good, they've actually already covered the FAQs that I'd structured, which I've seen coming in from the EOI raise already. So we've covered a lot of those off already, which is fantastic. And this next question I think is great because somebody's asking around, the value of the product versus the gross profit margin, which you can actually gain from each individual bike, off the basis that you've really gone for a quality product. So it'd be great.
So the product margin that we're making at the moment is encouraging in the sense that it's going to be, and we foresee that to be quite a comfortable margin at the moment. We are going to be getting some margin growth in regards to our cost of goods will slowly reduce. So our cost of goods forecast at the moment is increasing because we're understanding shipping, packaging is a lot more than what maybe the shipping has increased because of what's going on in the globe at the moment. But packaging, for example, our packaging costs of this bike will be somewhat 7 to 10 times more than a standard bike box because of the fact that we're going to be delivering the bike with the wheels both on and only 2 screws to do up. And part of that reason, that's the first, I suppose, theme of our packaging, is because the biggest reason there is we know that the people who will be, or the majority of people who will be buying this bike will not be bike mechanics or want to be able to start putting their own wheels on, etc. This is really an urban transport machine for someone who is getting out of their car or getting off public transport. It's not necessarily, we will have these riders, but it's not necessarily setting it up for a fitness rider who knows how to change tires and knows how to build a bike and then come in. The other thing that we're really conscious of, and we stipulated with our packaging, is we don't want 1,000 rip ties and plastic and foam, which sort of contradicts exactly what we're trying to do when we're looking at this people. And so we're investing heavily there. And so there are some costs that aren't necessarily associated with, or that are different with when you look at other bikes. I mentioned about margin expansion. We have a deal with our manufacturing partner that Julian's briefly spoken to, but we have an open book policy. So as we start driving scale, we've actually got at least verbal commitment with them. When we move to the 3,000 to 5,000 bike mark, which should be in the first 2 years, I would think, we get to that point, our price per bike will actually come down, and we've actually forecasted in partnership with them for it to reduce by 33%. And so one, delivering us a higher profitability, but it also gives us the ability to potentially reprice if we needed to in the marketplace. So those earlier questions around price, we have the ability to understand price elasticity and how it moves in the marketplace, and whether or not, hey, you know what, we actually do want to just get more people riding so we can actually potentially bring the price down while still being profitable and delivering to the shareholders what they require.
No, fantastic. Fantastic. And Malcolm here has asked a question about how long the bike purchase discount is valid for. And I think we've probably got an answer that's going to be incredibly satisfying for you to know about the up and coming campaign. Over to you guys.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're encouraging that the idea around these rewards with this particular round is to ensure that we can have investors that actually are on a Roadster, because we want to make them a part of the company and feel part of the company and get on a Roadster. And so the earliest opportunity for them to get on a Roadster will be part of our pre-order campaign in November. If for whatever reason there is someone who potentially lives outside of Perth or over on the East Coast and would really like to have a test ride before they confirm the purchase, we'll work with those individuals to ensure that they can get a test ride. So it's not too easy to get out of WA at the moment, or get in, should I say. But we do know people in those states, and what we may actually do is, we're sort of working through this now, but we are going to have up to 6 bikes available for test ride in November. And potentially we may send 2 of those, one over to Melbourne, potentially one to Brisbane, and set them up with our friends. So then people, investors can actually touch and feel and potentially go for a ride on those bikes, see the bikes and see if they want to execute their discount. So in the documents that you'll see, the discounts are valid until the end of November this year. But without question, we'll work with investors, whatever suits them, because we understand that with a purchase like this, and it being so big, even with a discount, a lot of people will want to touch and feel the bike prior to actually getting their order in. I will say that with the pre-orders, as the bikes come into the country, obviously we'll be filling the earlier pre-orders. So the earlier you get a pre-order, the earlier you'll be on a bike. But we'll work with people on that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, for anybody who, look, at this point in time, anybody who hasn't expressed interest to invest, I'd highly encourage you to do that ahead of the offer opening next week. The offer document itself will feature some of the rewards, and when that investment offer is open, you can see some of the rewards, of which will be very generous in terms of what kind of discounts you can get towards a bike. That information will absolutely be in the offer document itself. Paul here has asked around the battery itself, and if there's any special technology that you've used in particular in putting that together.
Well, that's a good question. The thing we noticed with the beta bikes, and actually that I was just saying the battery that's in there is actually a beta bike battery. This is the production model that we've got back from the factory. Actually went home with one of our staff members just before we started this. So we're still test riding them every day to make sure and that's part of what happened just before. The 2 batteries and this bike aren't completely compatible. So what we did actually is, most people that buy a cheaper e-bike will realize that when it shows that it's got, in terms of lights, say it's got 5 lights to show it's full and 1 to show it's nearly empty. When it shows 5 lights, it doesn't actually mean it's full, because the battery is, the controller is actually sensing how much, what the voltage is, not actually how much is left in the battery. One thing we have done and upgraded to is what they call a smart battery management system. Okay, the cells inside of this are a high quality Samsung, Panasonic, LG batteries, lithium ion. So all of that is pretty much what the good brands are using. So that's not unique, but the smart battery management system, it actually measures how much energy is going out of the battery, so that the lights that you see to show you how full it is actual real capacity, not an estimation. Because sometimes you get on a bike of our sort of original test bikes that didn't have this technology, and it's so 5 lights, but as you go up a hill, it drops back to 1. So it actually hasn't got much left. So that's a big, we decided to, it's slightly more expensive, but that is a really important feature to be able to get the most out of your battery.
Yeah, awesome. No, fantastic. And Robin here has asked, how did you come up with the name Tiller?
How long have you got?
Yeah, how long have we got?
Yeah.
Short version, you've probably learned a bit about me from this, but look, the short version is, I've been involved in sustainability and making a difference with business for a fair while. And at some point I came across this poem, turns out, with a guy who was saying, it's really an amazing business is a business that has like the heart of heart and soul on the tiller steering the ship. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to start a business that's going to make a difference, I couldn't really just create something that created another gizmo to sell. We're living in a world where we've got to deal with climate change. We really don't need any more gizmos in the world that aren't adding value to people's lives and maybe having an impact on the planet. So starting a business that is 100% about making a difference to those 2 things, it just made sense to call it something along that whole thing of we're steering the ship with the sort of heart on the tiller. So
that's awesome. That's great. That's great.
I think company value is being led by the heart.
Yes.
And that sort of ties into that story.
It's a bit hard to explain what that means, but I think most people get a sense of,
do the right thing.
Yeah, when you want to make a difference, what is it that's making you want to do that? And that's what we call the heart on the tiller.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And we've just got one final question, which is great because it's actually really going to lead into what I think the future of Tiller, might look like from a service perspective. Joanne here has asked, what about services? And I know that you've probably thought about this, really, I guess sat down and wondered how you're going to price it. But I'm sure you probably have an answer already prepared for this.
Is it servicing the bike? Is that what you
Yeah,
mean?
that's right. That's correct.
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, go for it.
So there's sort of multiple prongs on that. The first one is we are in the big cities, at least we will have a servicing centre where people will be able to bring bikes back to have, and we would like to see that as the major servicing. If there's something really wrong with it, that's where they'll be able to come to. There's a lot of things on the bike that are everyday or things that might need to be changed in the first 5,000, 10,000 kilometres, tyres, brake pads. They can actually do that at any bike shop. Not that we'd actually necessarily recommend that. There might be other better ways that we'll offer, but there is the opportunity to do that. And some of that is even DIY, like changing a tyre. A lot of people know how to do that. They'll be able to order that online, arrive at their place, and they can either take it to the bike shop, get that done. The other side of it is that digital connectivity. It allows the bike to actually, I guess you'd call it self-diagnose, but it actually can find out a lot of what's going on inside the electronics and then actually send that through the server to a back end that our support team can see, or the rider can see through their app what might be wrong with it. And so there's an easy way of providing support for some of that simple stuff. Now, the reason we did that, one, it makes things easier, but a lot of products are coming out at the moment through bike shops, electric e-bikes, and the e-bikes have got no idea how to fix them. So we're going to provide that level of support across the board to all the products. The other thing, I guess, to also add is we've done a vast amount of testing to make sure that we don't have issues. You know, that testing that you just saw where we actually ran the software and it didn't work, that's actually because that version of software is currently being updated weekly, and we're doing testing and testing and testing. So we will, by the time the bikes hit the road, there'll be no major bugs or things that are wrong with them. We've had 2019, we had 6 bikes on the road for an entire year, and we didn't have a failure. So the only thing that we had a broken stand, for example. We had 2 broken stands, but the stand's been redesigned. So there's nothing that we know of that should fail. And the rule when we did the design, just by the way, was it had to be reliable off-the-shelf parts unless that part wouldn't do the job. So for the important things, which most people worried about, as I mentioned, the motor controller and the battery, it's second to none. The technology we've chosen, and we didn't choose, for example, to build a new motor controller because that's actually quite difficult to do. We've chosen the Bafang system, which is proven to work. So it's a combination of quality products, the sort of online digital support. You've got the bike shops as a backup. One thing we're going to bring in the areas as we grow is mobile servicing. There's a bunch of people around that are already going out to do mobile servicing. There is a bike fix group. I think that's actually the name of them. So we're looking to partner with them, but also, and we haven't lined this up yet, but the plan is to even have partners such as RAC. Most of the states have an RAC of some sort that does roadside assist. We would rather partner with them, train them to do some of the servicing. And then that's actually the way you get things done. But we don't actually have to do it all as our company, because that would be a big expense to set up. Do you have anything to add to that, too? That's good.
Yeah, awesome. And we just had another question in about bike size. I've just answered and said that there's just the one size with the seat which is adjustable. And of course, the offer document is going to cover future products that you're going to be looking into. I'm sure that if anybody wants to break down the future scope of where you'd love to take Tiller rides, and I'm sure other products that you'd like to branch into, you have a lot more to cover on that. I think it'd be great to, just cover off and say to everyone, thank you so much for attending. And it's been really great to sit down with you guys and learn so much about, not only from where you've come from as a business since inception, but really where you've come from since the last time we were working together. It's just such a huge leap. And I think, Jude, in joining the team, I can see that you've just got so much worldwide experience from products that it really just shows that when you're applying it to Tiller, you just think about it so differently. And yeah, guys, it's been fantastic to sit down. For everybody who's attended, thank you so much for tuning in towards the end. We will be sending out the recording and, of course, informing everybody when the investment offer opens up next week. Any closing words from you guys?
But it's just, we feel really honoured to not only be doing a project, but have so many people interested. You know, we've been open for this 2 weeks. The amount of expressions of interest has been phenomenal. So well, we thank you for all your interest so far. We are here to answer questions. We'll be in touch with all the EOI people, offering either email or phone calls, especially for those that are considering big amounts. So take advantage of that, because, you know, we really want you to be comfortable with the investment. We obviously have big plans. We're going to do, you know, big things within this business. I think Australia doesn't think big enough with what they're trying to do in certain sectors. We would love, you know, everyone in Australia to be proud of the Tiller brand in, you know, 3 to 5 years' time, when we're sort of a global brand that's making a difference to this sort of clean transport revolution. So we'd love to have you on board. It's not all about us. You know, when you're making a difference, you need people to back you. And you also want them to come on the journey and enjoy it. And so we'd love as many people as possible to be part of that. So that's actually the main reason we went for the equity crowdfunding, is because otherwise we'd just have a handful of big investors. But this way we can have a larger number of people across the country being part of the journey.
Of course, of course. Well, look, that really concludes it. Thanks everyone for tuning in. And of course, we will see you in the investment offer. Take care.
Thanks very much.
Very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.